Good evening and welcome. I'm Leila Logisico. I'm the president of the City Club of New York, and I want to welcome you aboard tonight's forum. This is actually the third in our series on the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. This one is going to be a voyage into one of the city's most overlooked but critical pieces of infrastructure, the Brooklyn Marine Terminal. This 122-acre stretch of waterfront in Red Hook is one of the last remaining harbors of possibility along Brooklyn's working shorelines. And yet, the waters surrounding its future remain murky. The city's Economic Development Corporation, EDC, has charted a course that emphasizes real estate development, particularly market-rate housing, as a vessel to finance a yet-to-be-defined port facility. But the details of this plan are foggy at best, and the public so far has been left adrift. So tonight, we aim to right the ship. This panel will navigate the broader horizon. What should a 21st century maritime hub look like in New York? How can we anchor the site in real maritime use, commercial, recreational, and logistical? What policies are already docked and ready to be deployed, like the Blue Highway or the regional ferry networks that have been ignored in the city's planning thus far? And what lessons can we bring aboard from other ports around the world that have managed to evolve without losing their soul? And to help us explore these questions, I am really delighted to introduce our moderator, Carlos Menchaca. Carlos is a former New York City Council member who played a key role in waterfront development in South Brooklyn. He brings deep experience in community-led planning, infrastructure, and civic engagement, and currently hosts a program on 99.5 FM WBAI, where he continues to champion inclusive development. Joining Carlos tonight on deck are three outstanding panelists. Simon Betzelel, who manages capital projects for the Port of San Francisco and has built ferry terminals, parks, and industrial facilities from coast to coast, including during his time at NYC EDC. Tom Fox, a veteran maritime operator and longtime advocate for New York's waterfront. He is the co-chair of the City Club's Waterfront Committee and the author of Creating the Hudson River Park. And Jim Tampakis, founder and owner of Marine Spares International, located in Red Hook. Jim brings not only deep knowledge of maritime industry operations, but also a vital local perspective through his work with the Brooklyn Marine Terminal Task Force. So we're thrilled to have this crew on board tonight. And as we set sail into deeper waters of planning, policy, and possibility. And with that, I will hand the wheel over to Carlos to begin the journey. Carlos, take it over.
Thank you. Thank you, Leila, and everyone at City Club. It's an incredible engine for the city, and I'm glad we're here today. Buenas noches. Thank you for joining us tonight. If you're out there, wherever you are right now, thank you for joining us tonight in this really important conversation. My name is Carlos Menchaca, and I am honored to moderate this important conversation about the future of Brooklyn's working waterfront, specifically the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, or what we're going to probably throw around BMT. So I wanted to start actually with something a little bit more personal about my relationship with the waterfront. The waterfront was once very foreign to me. And whether you're a New Yorker or like me, a transplant from the deserts of Texas, the reality is that many of us grow up in the city without ever truly touching and engaging the water. You know, we live surrounded by it, yet we're disconnected from it physically, economically, politically. But here's what I've learned, that you can actually study the waterfront, you can integrate into it and in the work that you're doing, whatever work you're doing, that you can fight for it, that you can advocate for it, and most importantly, you can have vision for it. And that's what tonight is about. You know, when I served as a city council member for District 38 in Brooklyn, it covered Sunset Park and Red Hook, and I had the opportunity to work on some really transformative projects on the waterfront. In 2015, I worked alongside many of you to support the redevelopment of the South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, not the BMT, but south of it in Sunset Park. And that process, that we engaged in 2015 prioritized public input, legislative and land use oversight, and a clear commitment, which we baked into the 39-year master lease with EDC, a legal commitment to maritime and industrial uses. Not to mention labor peace agreements. We can get into that later. But that project is now a hub for offshore wind energy, proof that smart planning guided by public accountability works. So we pushed for the investment of the Bush Terminal Pier Park. The community had been working on that for a long time. And then later, the Bush Terminal Campus, a 32-acre piece of property now going in resurgence. So the Brooklyn Army Terminal, even more south on that strip in Sunset Park, is also another example that has a functional pier that has ferry service and maritime docking. These projects were not accidental. They were the result of vision, planning, and community advocacy. But here we are in 2025, looking at a new proposal for the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, BMT, and asking some similar questions. Whose future is being planned? And for whom? So we are facing a new opportunity and new challenges at the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, and tonight's panel will kind of do something that EDC is struggling to do in its accelerated timeline, which is to make the case for the maritime future, our future of the site. And so we're going to explore tonight uh, why BMT matters. But the city and its region really need a lot of good information and advocates. So we're going to hear from them today because we're going to hear a little bit about small vessel cargo, the concept of blue highway, and the power of ports that drive public good, not just private gain. We'll also examine what's missing from the current redevelopment process and maybe what we got to do to get it right. And I want to ask you to use the Q&A function to submit your questions so we can bring your voice into the conversation at the end. So let's get started with this conversation. I'm really excited to bring on Tom Fox, a veteran of many, many faces. Tom, give us a quick introduction and tell us a little bit about what makes you excited on the waterfront.
Well, I'm a longtime park advocate, founding co-chair of the Brooklyn Bridge Park, first president of the Hudson River Park, started New York Water Taxi in Red Hook, lots of employees from the Red Hook houses and the Harbor School. And I've been president of the International Ferry Organization and consulting in places like Australia and Canada on ferries. There's a great potential in this waterfront, and I'd like to do a little PowerPoint to give you some ideas, roughly,
Okay,
as to what might happen, if you don't mind.
let's do it. Thank you, Tom.
Okay, this is what we're talking about, but you already know about that. New York is a city of water, obviously. It's one of the largest natural harbors in the world. The inner harbor is what I'm particularly interested in, is how do you get around in here? How do we move things back and forth? Things have been moving since the Fulton Ferry landing started. That's a fellow blowing a horn, telling the farmer that runs the rowboat that he wants to go over to Manhattan. That matured into the Nassau, which became, and Fulton Ferry landing began. And the East River became chock-a-block with ferries moving back and forth. Same thing for Jersey, on the west side of the river. There was no bridges or tunnels, and everything was connected by boat. Literally hundreds of thousands of people swarmed off ferries every day going into the city. And the entire edge of the city was bristling with piers to absorb and support that influx of both people and products. Products were coming from the Erie Canal by the 1840s, and they were coming from overseas. However, things change. Technology always changes, and this is the Brooklyn Bridge. All of a sudden, bridges started going, the Brooklyn Bridge, the Williamsburg Bridge, the Manhattan Bridge, the George Washington Bridge, tunnels, all throughout the city. So as a result, people got off their boats and into these cram-packed little things called subways, and into their cram-packed little cars to run around the city. And the once mighty waterfront disappeared. This is 1955, Midtown passenger ship terminals. You can see down the west side, the piers are starting to look empty as you look further downtown. This is Ideal X, the first container ship in the world, 1956. She was able to dock at the west side piers because it's a small ship. Now they can't. The cargo moved to New Jersey, where there was access to two things that are critically important for cargo: rail and highway transport right nearby, as well as Newark Airport. So packages come into Newark, they get shipped out of there. Things come in from overseas. You can see the incredible activity there. And you can see the airport, the highway, the railways. That has the infrastructure to support containerization. Leaving New York and its wonderful blue open highway with nada. So a brilliant man, a trucker from New Jersey called Arthur Imperator, began the first trans-Hudson ferry. The only ferry that was lasted was the Staten Island ferry, which was city subsidized. The first private ferry was New York Waterway coming from Weehawken, New Jersey to Midtown Manhattan. And people flocked to the ferries. And C Street moved people from further out, from Monmouth County and further down south in New Jersey. And then a little company started in Brooklyn called New York Water Taxi. We built a home port in Red Hook. We were the first company to move people back and forth to IKEA in 2004. We opened Brooklyn Bridge Landing. We and opened up the East River. We opened up Schaefer Landing. You can see our little dock on the right side. Went to Long Island City and developed a fleet of 12 vessels, 250 employees, carrying 1.5 million people to 15 different locations every year. The route looked just like this. We were primarily on the west side because I'm a Hudson River Park dude, and I wanted the west side to have transportation. But you can see it was both for tourism and for transportation. And we use the tourism at $25 a pop to underwrite the commuters at $5 to $10 a pop, depending on how far they were going. So it was kind of using the tourist dollars to help New Yorkers to get around. Something happened. In 2017, EDC said, that's a great idea. So they started their own ferry. And you can look at the routes and they're very similar. We went to the Rockaways as well. But they didn't use existing companies. They built their own ferries. They built their own docks. They built their own home port. They took over our home port at Brooklyn, which we shared with Circle Line at Brooklyn Navy Yard. And but one thing that we all learned during 9/11, which is why we started actually New York Water Taxi, to move people around the city because everybody could get back and forth from other places, but not from here to there for us. So realizing emergency preparedness is critical, and you're not getting out by tunnel or subway. And this is what happened in the blackout just 2 years later. So the city began investing in major ferry facilities. There's the Port Authority facility at World Trade Center. This is the EDC facility at West Pier 79. That's 39th Street. And if you look at the harbor, that little piece of land sitting behind Governor's Island here is critically located between the East River, the Hudson River, into Arthur Kill and out into the harbor. So this is a vital piece of maritime infrastructure that needs to be preserved. I was a founding co-chair of the Brooklyn Bridge Park. And what's happened is that a lot of the maritime commercial waterfront has been turned into residential. Williamsburg, Greenpoint, the Hudson River Park, which I'm involved in, is a maritime park, which has passenger ship terminals and ferry terminals and tour boats and kayaks, but it's a park. It's not a commercial maritime waterfront. The city does have a commercial maritime support facility on the North Shore of Staten Island, which is very robust. But support facilities like this one in London for regular ferry operations, that happens to be the Thames Clipper, are few and far between. Waterway has their own, Sea Streak has their own. But there's, classic cruises in Manhattan by Sail and, Circle Line and 10 other smaller companies that don't have any support facilities. So we came up with the idea in 2007 of converting Atlantic Basin into a commercial maritime center. And we responded to an RFP from EDC. And I put together $100 million to do it in private capital. That we were turned down. They withdrew the RFP. The basin sat pretty much empty for about 15 years. You can see like a Mary Kay Whalen. There were a lot of important vessels there for the local community, but it's a terribly underdeveloped resource. Well, New York City thought that was a good idea too. So now they've started their own home port in Atlantic Basin with the same things we posed: travel lift, refueling facilities, etc. One of the problems is economic development corporations are supposed to be stimuluses to private investment. These people are cannibalizing private businesses by taking it over, subsidizing it with the city, controlling the boats, picking individuals to run them, but they're not getting private capital into the game, and they've, wasted tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars rolling out this system, like running it empty during the COVID crisis. You really have to have mariners running marine assets. So, container port in Red Hook is critically important for the scheme of things in the harbor. However, it's not really of the scale that can deal with this type of vessel. These are current container vessels. I believe that, Pier 10 and this location right here, Pier 9B, 9A, and 8 should all be active commercial maritime, no housing. And Pier 7, half of it could be a dry stack marina, and the other half of it add to Brooklyn Bridge Park. So here's the site, and here's my Tom Fox daydreaming. This is the site. This is the area we'd like to see as heavy commercial maritime. The cargo comes in, we get international and coastal container ships dock in Newark, Elizabeth, Howland Hook. Right now, they move those containers by barge over to Brooklyn Army Terminal, Brooklyn Marine Terminal. They're emptied there. We would see them being emptied there, put into on-site logistics facilities, and return, the empty containers returned to the ports in New Jersey, and the contents reprocessed and put into smaller electric vans or so to go to other locations. Now, people talk about the Blue Highway. EDC was created in 91, didn't exist before that. In 94, the first study was done on short sea shipping, which is what the Port Authority was calling it. That was in 1994 by Dr. Roberta Weisbrod. In 2012, they did the same thing for temperature-controlled warehousing. In 2023, EDC repackaged this type of idea as the Blue Highway. But to date, nothing's happened. That's because their first RFP was to land things at the heliport. You want to land trucks at the heliport in Lower Manhattan? Again, you need mariners to really design marine systems. Putting stuff on smaller vessels and moving it throughout the harbor to places like 125th Street. This is right on 125th Street in Harlem. Pier 92 on the west side is abandoned. Newtown Creek, the east side in Harlem at 125th Street. 36th Street in Midtown. There are loads of places to move this stuff to, where a small ship could drive in. This already has a roadway that comes right off it and goes into the city. We take the existing infrastructure, repurpose it. The group in Harlem wants to turn this into a museum, maritime museum. Well, if you had a working waterfront on the bottom and a maritime museum on the top, what would be better? Second, you look at a support facility, travel lifts, fuel facilities, repair facilities, electronics, repowering on Pier 8. And then Pier 7, the upland part of it becomes a dry stack marina because you need to be over land. And instead, boats have not worked well in marinas in New York because they get beat to death by the waves and the wakes. So a dry stack marina would allow every man, so to speak, a person with a 20 to 30 foot boat. It's not a rich person that needs a big dock in Manhattan, but you could fit about 300 boats in a facility right here, and then and have support like the Whalen, like the Lehigh Valley Barge, historic preservation, showing the history of the waterfront, and then open space. The neighborhood doesn't have a lot of open space, so you could take the perimeter, skim it, make it open space, and made access to Pier 7, have Brooklyn Bridge Park support the creation of public space on Pier 7. So you get commercial maritime, recreational maritime, and public open space. Right now, we have all these logistics facilities that were put into Red Hook in the last 10 years. Places like Amazon and IKEA and UPS. But they're all moving stuff through the city, through Red Hook. So if you looked at it completely, step back, this would be a maritime industrial waterfront in Red Hook, where the barges that are coming over from New Jersey can land here at Pier 11. The ships leaving from here to distribute stuff can also pick up here, 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 here. So this would tie together this entire maritime commercial waterfront and give meaningful jobs to people like the Harbor School. Now, what are the benefits? It's quicker, it's cheaper, it doesn't require market rate housing, it eliminates truck traffic, it services the last mile facilities that are there, creates thousands of jobs, catalyzes private investment in the waterfront, and supports New York emergency preparedness. It saves time because building the piers are a lot quicker than trying to fill it in and create a new container port, which would take God knows how long. They fought for 10 years to fill in the Hudson River and lost. Who pays? You know, everybody's, oh, we're going to have market rate housing. BMT is an IBZ. If we're developing it as a commercial maritime facility, then why aren't we getting Industrial Development Agency bonds? Same thing happened in South Brooklyn Marine Terminal, where the wind energy is $843 million. Why is a Red Hook chopped liver, if you will? And the IDA is administered by EDC, so they know exactly how it works. I don't want to go on too long. You need other agencies to help. If the DOT said heavy trucks can't move through Red Hook, they'd be going on the water. If EDC said we'll use, industrial development bonds to help you build facilities on the water to move these packages for your private investment, chances are it would happen. So
Tom,
we have to.
and this maybe
Sure.
this is a good point to pause, so we can bring some our Jim and Simon into the conversation.
Sure,
And I think we're going to
that's
want
it.
to go deeper
Thank you.
into what you're kind of
That's
you
it.
just presented, because I have
Yeah.
some good follow-ups. And really that kind of takes us into Red Hook, that map that Tom outlined that includes the BMT and other kind of private parcels, does show a working waterfront. And so what's great about this conversation is that we're putting the maritime face forward in this panel. And so, Jim, I'd like to invite you to introduce yourself and your work and what's going to be helpful for this conversation.
So my name is Jim Tampakis. I've been in Red Hook for approximately 50 years, 51 years. My dad started a ship repair company in Gowanus and right after the Korean War. And in 74, we moved into Red Hook, where we had employees of 150 people doing ship repair work throughout the city, in the harbor, et cetera, et cetera. I think Tom's presentation was great. I want to tweak it a little bit. I think that Pier 7 could become, so my thing is I know, can you go to the one before this picture? Where the
Want me to pull up the?
Yes.
Sure.
So these are Kunz cranes, and I would like to, my thing is, you know, if we can bring in the freight via barge, and not use the Red Hook Marine Terminal cranes, because those are going to be working on ships. These are more affordable cranes. Sanitation is using them. We could bring in all of our containers. We could build these cranes on, let's say, Pier 8, and bring all this freight, all these containers that we have coming into Red Hook today, and even more, create a water distribution network and facility that would be this flex maritime that the EDC is talking about for the Blue Highway. So we bring in the freight via container, we break it down. Then the next slide is we put it in a sorting facility, which Tom, my thing is, I would like to see a sorting facility similar to this on Pier 7. I know that a lot of people are talking about extending the Brooklyn Bridge Park into Pier 7, but Brooklyn Bridge Park is already 65 acres of land, and that's a beautiful thing. My kids go there, play soccer and everything, and they love it. But, you know, why do we need to add another 5 acres of parkland to the 65 when we can use something and hold on to it for the future? Just the way you were saying, 100 years ago, everything was maritime. We moved all of our freight, and now I think we have to go back to it again. As we heard just last week with the Delaware River, the bridge that collapsed when the ship ran into it. Now all of a sudden they want to do, you know, the Verrazano Bridge. They want to look at the George Washington Bridge. They want to look at all these bridges because they have all this heavy traffic and all these heavy trucks, overweight vehicles, and why not put them on the water, bring them in via water, get them off of our bridges, get them off of our streets, get them off of our infrastructure, our highways, our local streets, bring them in via container, break them down, and then send them out again via water. Can we watch that 57-second video clip possibly? Which is basically what they're doing in Europe. And this is a Zulu Associates film, and take 57 seconds, please. So basically, instead of having everything, there's no sound on it, but instead of putting everything on the trucks, getting stuck in traffic, not putting them on a container vessel, obviously, but putting them on a smaller, versatile boat that can go and have the flexibility of moving everywhere, putting them in smaller container pods that could be placed on chassis of like similar to the Amazon vehicles, drop them off throughout the city, have hubs throughout the city, and this way they can intercept the freight these on the containers that are going to be destined for each particular zip code throughout the city. New York City has 520 miles of waterfront. They could pick up their packages and do the last mile delivery and be, you know, electrified. We could put solar panels on these new buildings that we're going to be putting up, the warehouses, the distribution facilities, and just take it from there and like really create a good water distribution network that's going to be very friendly. And we need to also be friendly to our water and respect our water because it's critical, but at least we'll get all of these trucks and all these things happen. And it'll also, you know, the Blue Highway, I'm all for it. I think it's great. And this could be a major hub for it. And then in addition to this, like we said, you know, we can do the, you know, support the Brooklyn Marine Terminal, support the Red Hook Marine Terminal. We need it. We need to put in cold storage facilities. We need to do everything because at this point, we're bringing in the cold storage. We're unloading it in Red Hook, putting it on barges, sending it back to Jersey, breaking down the freight, putting it on trucks again, and then sending it back into the 5 boroughs to do the distribution. which is like a lot of running around. We could have cold storage facilities here. We can work in tandem and work also with Hunts Point. Hunts Point Market is 60 acres. They employ 2,400 people in Hunts Point. They have an annual income of over $2 billion a year. So, I mean, we can learn from just within ourselves on what works and what doesn't work. And, you know, that's what I'm trying to pursue. I'm on the task force. I'm always voicing these opinions, and you know, and I'm going to pursue them.
Jim, thank you so much. One, for also letting everyone know that you are on the task force, which is great for people to know, and this kind of deeper sense of Red Hook and these kind of international plans that can actually maybe inform future cargo distribution in the city. Now, to bring in a kind of step back a little bit, we're going to go to Simon, who is in Sunset Park, has a good sense of New York City, and what's happening here through EDC, and can share with us a little bit about what's happening in San Francisco that can give us context about what's happening in other places. Simon?
Yeah, thank you. And first, thank you for the City Club. It's great to see so many people interested in engaging on these topics. The first few panels were very educational, and I think that's really where I want to ground what I have to bring to the table is just education. I think instinctively we know that there's importance to the maritime economy, but many of us maybe lack some of the specifics. To Carlos' point, like don't have any relationship to it or no visibility into it. So that's kind of the context for the information that I want to provide is just a little bit of level setting, some terminology, just to kind of get everyone a little more familiar with some of the concepts if you're using them for advocacy or just so you can kind of put this in context of a broader place. I do have some slides if you're able to share them, but I can get going in the interest of time. And I'll speak a little quickly to make sure we have time for questions. But briefly, I just kind of want to touch on kind of the nature of ports. They're unique in jurisdictional and kind of government structure. Typically in America, they're quasi-governmental, meaning so they do have some government oversight, but are in many ways outside of government process. They typically have a board of directors, which are politically appointed or appointed through some form of internal process. So you kind of have to know your stakeholders a little bit. And then primarily they are, even if they are like the Port of San Francisco, a city department, they're financially independent. They need to generate their own revenue for capital budgets, for operation budgets from the rents that they charge their tenants. So even though industrial maritime use is considered by many a public good, there still is a very firm bottom line for the need to make money to support themselves and to keep facilities in good order. So I just kind of wanted to bring that forward and additionally say that ports are largely split into two categories. There's ports as landowners, meaning they own the jurisdiction, but then they rent out their facilities and the tenants are responsible for providing equipment, or they're owner operated, which means that they own the land and they provide the technical equipment that's used, and they are more involved directly with the goods that move in and out of them. So to bring it to the Port of San Francisco, the Port of San Francisco is largely a landlord port. That means there is some industrial activity in San Francisco, but it's carried out by discrete operating partners. But there are some similarities between the Port of San Francisco and the Brooklyn waterfront, kind of in scale as well as in diversity of uses. You can see in this image here, and indicated in yellow, it really spans a lot of the iconic San Francisco. It's the skyline downtown, it's the ferry building, it's Fisherman's Wharf, really tourist-centric areas, and then moving south into industrial properties. And there's benefits and also a little bit of disadvantage for how industrial uses are really concentrated. But I think it kind of does offer some parallels between Brooklyn Marine Terminal and the other industrial properties that New York and Brooklyn have. The next slide, please. So really, this conflict between industry and real estate is not unique to this site. It's not unique to New York. It's conflict that happens in every single waterfront in America and globally. And it has to do with kind of that structure of ports. Ports need revenue to be able to develop their property and to keep things in good working order. And in America especially, the real estate state means that the most revenue comes from building housing. So there is this inherent kind of desire for ports to find their highest and best use, and that is mostly in economic terms. But there are some real cultural values that are embedded in the landscape of maritime industry. San Francisco, again, there's a historic commercial fishing fleet in Pier 45 in the northern waterfront, directly adjacent to Fisherman's Wharf, a very big tourist attraction. And there's this kind of dichotomy between industrial workforce and a very sort of isolated and in some ways run-down facility next to a very touristed, one of the most popular destinations in San Francisco. And the fishing industry is facing a lot of constraints. Environmental protections on marine species are constricting the windows in which they can fish. That's undermining their profitability. And then also the port, because there's not quite as much revenue coming through these facilities, is really unable to generate the capital investment required to keep up with the facilities. So there's this economic and facilities interplay that is evident in how industry is treated, not just in San Francisco. And then that's paired with real estate. And the picture on the right is recently completed China Basin, or Mission Rock is the name of the development. It brought 2 high-rise residential buildings and 2 high-rise office buildings on port property. This was formerly a parking lot. And by many people's standards, and I think widely accepted, this is deemed a really successful project. It brought a lot of revenue to the port. It created a new, very vibrant neighborhood. And because of very upfront goal setting on behalf of the port, it brought a lot of open space to the project. I will note that the landscape in California is different than New York, though. The port owns the property, but it's managed in jurisdictional partnership with the California State Lands Commission. And they require that port or waterfront property is managed in the public trust. And that generally means maritime use. So to generate a residential project requires additional legislative kind of hoops and jumps. And these projects are very long, and it takes a long, big effort to get them delivered. So the landscape is a little less pro real estate than maybe in New York, but these projects still are how the port generates a significant amount of income and elevates kind of new facilities. In this picture, though, there is a dichotomy. In the background is Pier 50. There's a big naval vessel that's parked out there for emergency response, and Pier 50 is also where Port of San Francisco's maintenance crews are. So there's a lot of heavy equipment in there. That's where a lot of the maintenance staff does the repairs that are needed across the waterfront. But there is that visual dichotomy between something very industrial in nature and this brand new, very shiny facility. Next slide, please. So in general, I think we talk a lot about the blue highway or maritime industry, but I do want to just offer some specifics on what these things are. First of all, blue highway is just kind of a rebrand of maritime highway, which is an initiative from the Department of Transportation at the federal level. And there's maritime highways that connect states. They move up and down the Mississippi. So blue highway is a little catchier, but I think there is a tendency to sort of blue wash some of this without actually knowing the specifics of what we're talking about. So to break it down a little bit in terms of cargo, container cargo is what we familiarize ourselves with ports. We think of these massive places that move these big things, and that really represents sort of our global capitalist commercial consumer economy. Things come from all over the world. Maybe the shirt you're wearing has traveled more than you have, and it's really because of these containers. But when we think about maybe smaller sites like Brooklyn Marine Terminal or some parts of the Port of San Francisco, I think we need to think about other types of cargo, generally bulk cargo. And that has a number of different terms in there. Bulk cargo is either wet or dry. And these are things that can't be containerized. That's the top right photo. So that could be grain or LGN, liquefied natural gas, maybe aggregate that's used in concrete. And then there's break bulk, which is things that are generally on pallets. So that could be textiles or food produce from other countries. And then a kind of newer category, neo bulk, refers to large countable objects like cars or spools of fiber optic cable, things that need heavy equipment to move them on and off, but are discrete items. And the ports generally can accommodate all of these things in one facility. Port of New York, New Jersey really has a lot of all of these things. But often smaller ports like the Port of San Francisco need to specialize just to kind of conserve resources and make sure they're doing things that kind of work better for their business line. So the Port of San Francisco specializes in break bulk and neo bulk cargo, importing and exporting automobiles as well as construction material. And yeah, that's all about that. Next slide, please. And to just lightly touch on a few more terms, gantry cranes, that's what moves containers on and off of vessels. You can see them at Brooklyn Marine Terminal. They're also used for some of the heavier break bulk cargo. Dry docks are what ships and maritime vessels are repaired in. They float in, the water is drained, and then you can repair them like above water. They're either graved, which means stationary, or floating, which means moving around. Ro-ro refers to break bulk coming rolling on and rolling off of vessels. So you hear ro-ro a lot. And that kind of infrastructure needs a wharf that is the same height as your vessel so things can come on and off. So there's a little bit of sea level rise adaptation planning that has to be kind of right sized to make sure ro-ro can be accommodated. And then shore power is a big initiative in the Port of San Francisco because we're so urban to electrify the vessels when they are docked at berths. So primarily cruise ships in Port of San Francisco, but also some of these larger ro-ro vessels. And that's way more complicated than it seems. Each vessel has its own kind of unique plug-in situation at different heights and different distances. So providing shore power is actually very complicated. Very heavy equipment is required to make sure you can plug into a variety of vessels. And it takes a lot of lengthy coordination with your power utility provider, BMT, that would be Con Ed. And it takes a lot to get these things done properly. Next slide, please. And then just to say, this is all within the context of resilience. I think we are starting to understand how housing looks at the waterfront. We're starting to understand what open space looks like. We're at the very beginnings of grappling with resilience, but it all is undermined by industry. How do these things play in with industry? We can raise our shorelines, but then that creates conflicts with how we move goods in and out of our shores. If we make them parks everywhere, we're undermining our city's abilities to respond to disasters, to have the flexibility and space that are required for these kind of new industries that come up, like offshore wind. So really, I wish I could say that San Francisco had the answer for what you're grappling with here, but I think more it's to say that San Francisco is dealing with the exact same problems. And I think that it's a conversation between Port of San Francisco, BMT, any port in our nation is grappling with these issues and kind of being more open about that. And I know SF loves to think they're exceptional, and I think New York kind of shares that. But it's really, that's a common goal that we all need to kind of coalesce around to bring kind of maritime industry forward and kind of develop workforce. Thank you.
Simon, thank you for that. And really thank all of you for laying the foundation for this conversation. I think what's going to be really important now as we move through some of the question topics. And I'm going to have one question just to get us started and point everybody to the Q&A as a way for us to kind of get to some of the bigger issues. And we'll get to housing later. But Tom, you really kind of laid out this historical connection to the water and industry, but you've laid out some very modern adaptation, restructuring for the waterfront. Are those things that you've laid out in your presentation viable? Or is there a need for that? Does the industry say, yeah, this is what we want? And can you give us, not in the industry, a sense of what that economic need is right now?
Sure. I spoke with about 15 different maritime professionals when I was getting my presentation together, from tug and barge operators to emergency fire department and police department folks, and break bulk cargo people, and containerization, and ferry operators, and tour operators, and historic ship operators. Nobody thinks there need to expand the container cargo capacity of Brooklyn Maritime Terminal. It serves its function to receive containers, as Jim had pointed out, but they should be broken down on site in refrigerated and logistic facilities and transshipped. If you look at Holland and Amsterdam, tremendous amount of produce and product moves on the waterfront around Amsterdam. Venice is like completely dependent on it, but the scale is so much smaller that it's hard to compare. But to get a ship repaired, if you have an aluminum vessel, you're going to Mamaroneck, New Jersey, up Hudson, or believe it or not, Massachusetts, to get Connecticut and Massachusetts, where there are aluminum shipyards. There's no repair facilities. Fueling is incredibly difficult. There's huge BMT, the huge fuel facility in New Jersey, but as we found during 9/11, when they have to close things for securities purposes, people are running out of fuel. So having a strategically located repair and fuel facility there that could take care of not only what's happening at BMT, but the tour industry vessels Circle Line gets things done at the North Shore of Staten Island.
Right.
And things are happening in Red Hook. Hughes Brothers just started a graving dock in Erie Basin. The spring will be their first season. So more maritime industry is coming. And if it were underpinned by the financial resources of the municipality, understanding that this is critical to the city's future, then private sector and public sector, that public-private partnership would come to play.
For the financing.
Well, if you build the white box with IDA funding, we'll rebuild the piers in kind on site. I talked to marine engineers, it cost about 500 million bucks.
Right.
To restore them to 1,000 pound per square, to 250 pounds per square foot at 1,000 pounds, $1,000 per square foot. And Jim, Pier 7 is 240,000 square feet.
270.
1,000 square feet in an acre, so it's about 4.5 acres. And the land part of it could be used because it's supported. Half the pier is over the water, half the pier is on the land. So there are economically viable options, and I'm sure investors, not only in the city, but from outside the city, which is what EDC's role is, to stimulate those types of investments.
And thank you for pointing to that. I just want to underscore a couple things you said in case folks who are following us are not familiar with IBZ, the industrial business zones. These are zones that have particular access to funding through bonds that are issued through EDC's apparatus. And so this is new money that can come in through bonds to do the work. And so thank you for saying that too. That these are other financial instruments that you can look up and find out that they're available. What's preventing EDC from funding it that way versus other ways? Which moves me over to Simon in San Francisco and what you're kind of also dealing with. And we get that there's a business model, right? You saw in San Francisco that you can actually bring in luxury housing. We have one at the Brooklyn Bridge Park. It makes sense. It's a business plan. It's a deal. But what would cause us to want to sacrifice? Like, at what cost are we sacrificing our precious industrial working waterfront? And what's the price we pay there?
I think San Francisco is a little different though from New York in that it's not quite as land constrained in terms of the shoreline. And a lot of that is that public trust requirement that's placed on the waterfront. So it hasn't had the same level of waterfront development pressure that's happened in New York. I will mention though that Mission Rock did originally include a very high subsidized rate of housing. So a lot of affordable housing was built into it. Unfortunately, post-COVID, those percentages had to be revisited. There still is affordable housing, but it's not quite as progressive as it once was. But there are some really unique environmental aspects built into it. It's its own utility provider for wastewater. It collects all of its own wastewater within the site. It's not even connected to other parts of the city. So there are kind of objectives that you can fulfill if you are including housing that can make something very remarkable. And then there's also the potential for including industry and housing. Vertical industry is totally possible, and people can live above that. So there's ways to integrate housing in a way that's not so single use and can be better integrated into the site.
So thank you for that, because that kind of pulls in another idea that's moving away from thinking about how we pay for this, but also kind of rethinking infrastructure beyond this particular site. And Jim, you gave a really great little Vimeo video about, it's the first time I saw it, about the Zulu Associates plan and concepts. So there was a question in the chat about Sunset Park and some of that redevelopment that's happening led by EDC, and thinking about last mile delivery. And this is something that across the country, people are thinking about warehouses. How can you kind of link up this bigger question, Jim, about last mile delivery? And I know the local city council member, Alexa Aviles, is leading the conversation in the city council right now. But can you just say a little bit more about what EDC can do, and whether it's EDC or a waterfront agency, which I keep seeing pop up in the chat, that people are advocating for, a whole other agency that just focuses on maritime, because EDC might not be the best fit for that kind of development.
So yeah, I agree. I think so. Unfortunately, just like 10 days ago, Jennifer with the EDC came out and was saying how, that operating a water distribution network like we're talking about is very expensive. It doesn't make sense right now. We need to work on it. We need to work on it so it can make sense. And I mean, my questions are always, are there any federal subsidies? If we can get thousands of trucks off of our interstate highways and our bridges that they're funding and helping pay for, I mean, isn't that like, can't that be beneficial towards this maritime network that we're talking about? And just, we need to come up with a plan, because, this is something that's going to bring us into the next 50, 100 years. And if we give it away, as far as I'm concerned, to housing, we'll never get it back again. I mean, one of my beefs, sorry, Tom, but like, with Brooklyn Bridge Park, if we would have delayed Brooklyn Bridge Park for a couple of years and we would have used that park space to make a road so that we could fix the BQE, and bring in with Hughes, like you said, prefabricated structures and put them in place, we wouldn't be saying, okay, living with traffic every day. We would have delayed the project a couple of years. We could have prefabricated something. So this is what I don't want to see happen, where we give away the BMT, which is, like you said, centrally located. This is going to be a major hub for all of New York City, for that's 520 miles, and we could do distribution throughout with these types of boats, with other types of boats, bringing in bigger, barges with containers, et cetera, and really do this the right way. But once we give it away, we don't have that option.
So I want to move that over to Tom. Tom, he mentioned you right now, and I feel like we're in a little debate here. But is it working? Is Brooklyn Bridge Park and the cross subsidy that everyone's kind of, not us in this conversation, but folks are saying it works. Is it actually working to cross subsidize? If you can kind of comment on that. And then I want to move over to the bigger conversation about housing and whether or not this is a place to build housing in a climate justice lens. So let's start with Brooklyn Bridge Park. Is it actually working? Does it actually make sense? And Tom, you are on mute, so we can't hear you. If you can unmute yourself.
Sometimes people prefer that. It's an EDC subsidiary, Brooklyn Bridge Park. And Hudson River Park is a UDC or ESDC now subsidiary. Sorry for the acronyms. I feel a little responsible because we set up the Hudson River Park, which Brooklyn Bridge Park was modeled after, and it does not work.
It does not work. I just want to, it does not work.
It works.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about why it doesn't work.
Well, I can tell you with the Hudson River Park specifically, when we designed the waterfront, we said, oh, we're not going to have the money to build this. So let's look at the 3 blocks inboard that are going to appreciate in value and change from industrial warehousing and trucking to residential and office buildings. And let's take a little piece of that, a little VIG, like a special assessment district or a tax increment financing or some creative mechanism to generate money. Everybody thought, good idea. Mayor Giuliani did not. He wanted all the money for himself. So the park was abandoned, if you will, as Brooklyn Bridge Park was. Fight for your own, brother. Make it as you can. So you wind up selling pieces, cutting off your left arm to save your right arm. You bring in development that's not necessarily appropriate or of the right scale to finance the public space. So the model of turning industrial waterfront into public parkland that has maritime uses is a very good one. Financing it is a little more tricky and should be done with more public resources instead of reliance on private resources, because parks are public assets.
Right. Thank you for that. And I know we can go deeper into that conversation. Simon, I'm gonna hand it over to you to really kind of think about the waterfront and housing and really the risks that are going to have to be thought about in mitigating as water and temperature increase. And I think there's a couple more questions that we can kind of overlay about just the proximity of that housing to the water, and maybe relationship to what's happening at BMT, and any kind of community outrage that happened and how that was internalized.
I think housing as a land use, we have a greater cultural understanding of how we climate proof it. We can raise it up. We've vetted ideas. There's been iterations of projects that have led us to better understanding how housing can address some of these project or issues. So I think in many ways, housing, it makes sense. You can elevate it easily. You can wet flood-proof the bottom floor so water can pass through. There are things you can do with housing that you can't do with industry. So in some ways, using the site for industry does make sense, or for housing does make sense. It's an adaptable shoreline use. Um, but I think what I said before about vertical use of industry and integrating them together is an opportunity. Because I think one of the largest issues here is that people don't understand maritime industry. They don't see it. It's not part of the cultural dialogue the same way that housing and public space are. So I think there needs to be more elevation of that as a concept, more ideation, more iteration around maritime industry. So if there is housing, I think it should really be focused on maritime. Like it should have like a theme of anchors everywhere. It should use reclaimed maritime industry components. There should be direct sight lines into the maritime industry. There should be educational signage. It just needs to create some level of communication between maritime industry so that it becomes culturally relevant. And I don't think maritime industry, and there's a lot of reasons why the public can't access it, and they're very justifiable, good reasons. But I think the treatment of the edge of a maritime industrial space that Jim mentioned before, or maybe it was Tom, about making public access around the edge, creating visual transparency, kind of treating it as a cultural asset. And housing could support that type of treatment.
Thank you for that. And I just want to note that on the questions, keep sending some questions in. Portside is already at the top, linking to some 9/11 information, which is great, some history, and a couple other things. So look at Carolina's place.
Have like a quick follow-up to
Yeah,
that.
please go ahead.
I think there's a tendency in our public space planning to over-program space. Like this is a place for sitting, this is a place for talking with your friends, this is a place for walking your dog. We kind of have really programmed our public space intensely. And I think we have the same tendency to do that with the master plan. But I think there's a huge value, and when you mentioned 9/11, that brings up the need for unprogrammed space, like space that can be flexible. The Port of San Francisco, we end up using a lot of our space for things that aren't tenanted or weren't expected. Vessels need to dock for an emergency, or there's an offshore wind company that needs to put a vessel here because they need to refuel or recrew or something happened. Like there's a importance for flexibility on the waterfront and in any space. That lack of programming is actually a really big benefit. Just thinking about Pier 30 and 32 in San Francisco, they've been derelict for a while. There's a big housing project on the books for it, but it's taken a lot to get through state government. During COVID, that facility became a huge rapid testing place. And there wouldn't be that type of opportunity in a dense urban environment without maritime industry and the flexibility it provides.
Thank you for that. So programming this space really requires many pieces, not just the financing, which we've been focused on, but also political power and process. There's a big question here about the way that EDC has structured this, both through an accelerated timeline, I think some say unnecessary, but also a lack of what we understand as ULURP, the Uniform Land Use Review procedure that gives power to the local council members to construct this with community, and it gives you a nice little timeline and a lot of accountability. That's not the choice here. So to this panel, and looking at all the pressure points, right? So EDC might not be the right organization to lead this. We might need maritime. We can look at other cities. There are a lot of ideas out there. How would you recommend us to think through the process, and what process could lead us to the right or a better project and a better planning process? Maybe Tom, I'll start with you. You're a veteran of a process. You've had to go through processes. You've won and lost in some of these processes. Give us a quick kind of comment about how to think about this. And I'm going to add another thing because this is something I kept saying while I was in the city council role, is really thinking through political power, building political apparatus for the Blue Highway, for the waterfront, to build PACs that fund political campaigns. I'm just kind of using this as educational purposes, not political purposes, but where's the PAC for the waterfront? And so if you can give us any sense of that, Tom, that would be great. And you are still on mute. So if you want to unmute, we
I'm
would
not a
appreciate that.
political guy. I'm a hustler. I use whatever is available, and politicians are one of them. You were a good one. Not all of them are, but the process is critical, and transparency. People say that community involvement is a pain in the neck. It is a pain in the neck. You got to listen to everybody and their mother, but you get great ideas. And if people feel like they're heard, it's their project. Right now, the problem is, Jim's on this task force. I don't think he feels like he's being heard because he's saying he continually says the same thing, and I don't see it happening. Thank you very much, Jim, for being our voice. But it's, if you want from an activist perspective, it's one of the legal documents that allow them to do this. Going back to the original transfer of the property, 1979. This chicanery with, we're only going to lease it so we don't have to go through ULURP. Who are the lawyers looking at that? It's questionable. They're pushing the timeline. I just read today that they announced they're making an $18 million investment and taking down cranes and things like it was in the paper this afternoon. Did they tell you, Jim, that they were doing all this investment today?
18 million.
What did they tell? Did they mention this?
No, we haven't been. We have our meeting on Friday, actually.
Okay. Well, hopefully they tell you that. But, putting the cart before the horse is not a good idea. It doesn't engender trust. A 9-month planning process for 122 acres of one of the most valuable pieces of property in New York City, that's a farce to begin with. So the foolishness is transparent, but the process is not. So hopefully the public and the media and other politicians, housing is critical. We need housing desperately in the city, but we don't need market rate housing to pay for a maritime industry that could support itself if it were supported properly. So the politics is definitely the PACs and such. I'm sure you're very good at.
Thank you. Thank you, Tom. Let's hear from Jim.
So I think you remember John McGettrick. He
Who
was
doesn't?
civic in Red Hook for many years. And he had told me, why don't we go and do what they do in Maine? They charge a package tax. They charge 25 cents or 50 cents. If we charge 20, so we do a distribution of 2.5 million packages, just the packages a day throughout New York City, which comes out to, if you put a 25-cent package tax, so instead of paying $65.25, now you're paying $65.50. You're paying a quarter to help subsidize this kind of distribution network, which on 2.5 million packages is $650,000 a day. It comes out to like $250 million or whatever it is every year. So, maybe that could be something that can assist us. Right. And, federal money, maybe, where we're going to be taking off trucks off the streets, like I was saying, we're reducing pollution. The EDC came out with a report last month that the average age of the trucks that are doing deliveries today in New York City are 16 years old. They're heavy polluters. And also when I was speaking with the professors from RPI, from Rensselaer Polytech, and from Hofstra, they were telling me also that all of these trucks, they use the worst trucks for the local deliveries because they figure, okay, if the truck breaks down, it's not a big deal. It's only 20 miles away. We can send the tow truck and pick it up. And you got all the nice new clean energy stuff happening from, let's say, longer distances. But here in the city, when I'm on the Gowanus every morning coming into Red Hook, you know, when I'm stuck doing 1 mile an hour and all of the trucks are there polluting everything, you know, it's upsetting because everybody in Sunset Park gets the first breath of pollution. Anyway, I mean, there's a
Right.
lot of things that we need to do and address, and you know, that's what I want to see us happen. You know,
Thank you, Jim. And so I know there's a meeting on Friday. There's a lot of things happening in the community that are not only being discussed but being kind of pushed in these public spaces, like a meeting that I saw happen earlier this week. But let's go to some of the Q&A specifically. I've been kind of doing themes, but now let's just kind of go through some of the pieces specifically. But Julie's question comment about the hallmark of BMT project is opacity. Why is EDC determined to force through the high-rise luxury towers and this environmentally harmful and outdated plan, which will overwhelm the neighborhood with traffic? Who is benefiting from this? And this is a bigger question about planning, which is always the question that drives planning in the first place. There's someone in the private sector or in government that wants to change something, to improve something. Who is benefiting from this? And so just quick answers. Who is benefiting from this proposal right now? As we see it kind of being pushed by EDC, does anyone have a sense about who would be
I think that's
benefiting?
just as transparent as the process.
Okay.
If
Okay.
you don't mind.
That says it
Okay.
all. Okay.
Who's benefiting?
Jim, if there's any kind of sense about who could be who
you
could
know,
be
I
benefiting?
mean, it like with that one proposal that they came up with, that they were really pushing for 8,600 and something units, and they were saying that, you know, average price on the units are anywhere from 1,600 to 2,200 or $2,400 a foot. Say you know, $2,000 a foot for the sale of these apartments that they're talking about. If you do the math on 8,600 and whatever, comes out to $17 billion. You know, if you do a construction analysis of $800 a foot, which is a high number, you know, you're talking that you got an extra $10 billion left over. Where does that money go? You know, I mean, does it go? It's not gonna, you know, I don't know. Where does all that money go? Does it go into other projects of the EDC? Does it go into
Right.
areas? I mean, I don't know. I think that we need to slow down the process. I think that we should give the Red Hook Marine Terminal their 60 acres, because we're always dancing around, you know, the Red Hook Marine Terminal. So let's take the Red Hook Marine Terminal out of the equation. Give them their 60 acres, and then let's fight about what we're going to do with everything else. We said we need flex maritime. We're going to get trucks off the streets. We're going to put things back on the water. We're going to create a water distribution network. That's what I want to see happen.
I would
Thank
argue
you,
to not
Jim.
give an inch. I would argue to not give an inch. Don't give them anything.
If I
So,
could weigh in a
yeah, go
little
ahead,
bit.
Simon.
I feel fortunate in some ways to be insulated from New York City politics, having not lived in the city for 3 years. So I can't necessarily speak to the motivations behind whatever's happening. But I do want to offer potentially, like, maybe EDC is the right partner in the sense that they have very strong ties with the business community. And I think the way they treated offshore wind, and they've done the Week of Wind, and they've done a lot of really interesting outreach that's engaged people and built capacity, they could approach this project with that same kind of creativity. When I think about containerization, I agree that this is maybe not the place for expanding containerization. Like, one kind of maritime concept is the Jones Act, where a vessel that's coming from international waters can't stop at 2 American ports. And it's very unlikely that Brooklyn Marine Terminal would compete with the port of Newark in attracting container ships. And the Jones Act means that the vessel has to be made in America, operated by Americans, and have American ownership of the company. So those vessels are probably not part of the equation. But I could see EDC doing really great work on engaging small local businesses and thinking about, like, furniture manufacturers or clothing distributors, people that, like, are doing very small things but are distributing their goods locally. Like beer, like, people make beer, they need to put it on a boat and get it to a restaurant. Like, and if there was an opportunity for small businesses to have a stake at the table, or maybe some form of outreach that could bring forward those ideas, that could find a home in BMT.
And that's a great
So
alternative to housing, Simon. I
an
mean, you
alternative to
could do,
housing, Tom?
well, you could do that type of maker industry type of, O'Connell organization and where we were in Van Brunt Street and Pier 41, they have glass blowers and carvers and weavers and parachute makers. And,
Right.
this world is filled with very creative people. And last thing we need is expensive housing. We need affordable housing. And affordable housing isn't going to subsidize anything else. It's going to be subsidized by something else.
I think also to tie that into some of the federal objectives that are kind of surfacing, maybe environmentalism is not the angle right now, but it could be made in America. And so like kind of prioritizing local businesses that use local materials that distribute locally, that can maybe be in line with some federal priorities. I'm not sure if grant funding will really be coming out, but at least kind of positioning this within a shifting landscape, there's a narrative that can align.
As would uh, emergency preparedness and national
Definitely.
security, being able to
Definitely.
move our goods and cargo without obstruction.
So on our 122 acres of land, we have about 750,000 square feet of buildings currently. So which the land is approximately, we said, whatever, 122 acres, which comes out to about 5.5 million square feet. So we have, over 4.5 million square feet of land that we want, where I think we could introduce some light manufacturing. We could elevate the buildings for the light manufacturing so they can become flood protected, maybe, and use the underneath for whatever types of equipment or whatever, and then have a ramp so you go up to a second floor where you can have all your facilities and it could still be resilient. I mean, we could think of creative ways if we have the opportunity to do so.
And
you
the
know?
time and the
And
power and the accountability over the system, and that seems to be lacking here. Jim, I'm going to read a comment from Mr. John Shapiro, who says housing can be raised up, but that doesn't work if the neighborhood is under the future high tide. Red Hook has had and will have flooding problems that make it almost impossible to floodproof. It will be below sea level, and the water table, the soil combo is that it will flood from seepage. And I think that's another kind of piece to this whole thing, because we're also talking about uh, marsh property. And when Sandy came, I remember in those few days after Sandy, tons of the ground floor basements were just destroyed with water pressure. Water came in from the bottom into homes to flood them. And so these are all kind of considerations as well as we move into them. Tina asks, can we talk more about jobs? And we really need to bring port jobs back to the residents on the waterfront that are living in Red Hook. And so does anyone have a kind of strong way to kind of connect the dots on this industry that the industry that is not yet here but wants to be here, if it had the space to do it, are these jobs for our community?
Well, we had 10 boats in Erie Basin. We had really 120 mariners, engineers doing repair overnight and such. So yes, there are many jobs, and not, jobs unloading containers are specific to one particular union. Jobs operating boats, repairing boats, supplying boats, doing logistics, doing small vehicle maintenance are easier to get and more plentiful in terms of their ability to draw in Red Hook houses. I mean, that's like probably 25% of the population, 50% of the population of Red Hook. Where's their stake in this?
75%.
Huh? How much?
75%.
75, there
75%,
you
yeah.
go.
It's
So,
three quarters.
how many of them are at the table? Excuse me. I mean, my best hires were from the Red Hook houses.
Yep.
Some of my longest still friends came out of there. And, this is a tremendous job creation opportunity for the local neighborhood that I can't quantify quickly, but it could be quantified fairly easily within, a week or two. If we had time, that's the thing you need, Carlos. We got to slow this thing down.
Well,
And
you know,
again,
I'm a lover of slowing everything down, so you
but
got
I
me
just-
Well,
on
I
that.
don't like slowing everything down.
so
Well, you know what I mean.
just on the jobs, like I said, so we have half the size space up in Hunts Point, and they employ 2,400 people. And where we are in Red Hook, you know, the EDC is telling us that we employ 200 people at the Red Hook Marine Terminal. So, you know, I mean, we can increase that by adding facilities, by being creative, by bringing in more jobs, by bringing in cold storage facilities, by bringing, and then Simon, the thing that I was saying about, I wasn't saying about for the local, we're talking about bringing in containers on barges. And I'm talking about bringing containers from Jersey, Pennsylvania, like Amazon, all of their freight that comes into Red Hook comes from Pennsylvania and New Jersey. So, I mean, you know, if we could get those thousands of trucks every month off of the street and bring them in on a barge and unload them, or, you know, on barges, unload them, break them down, and then send them out again via water. So this way we don't see them, we don't smell them, we don't have to hear them or anything. I mean, sanitation does this all the time with their recyclables. They bring in everything at nighttime, during the day. They're constantly, there's always 500 containers right in front of their facility on, you know, they got 50 containers, 48 containers on each barge. And there's always 10 barges there waiting to be unloaded. And they just turning them and turning them and turning them. And we don't see them, we don't hear them. They don't come out on Hamilton Avenue at all, which is a beautiful thing. That's what we want to see.
Right. So let me, so we have about 10 minutes before we have to wrap up, and maybe even less. And I just want to pull some comments out from our Q&A. David Burney, our wonderful, amazing friend. Can we stop using the term best and highest use, which just means what generates the most revenue, which is very much an EDC thing. I know they try to do a lot of different things, but that's always been a driver. Community has been the thing that pulls them back. So thank you, David, for that. How do we put a value on human values and community needs? And I think this process is kind of unveiling some of these needs in a different way that doesn't have to be about highest revenue. So thank you for that. Michael Preston is also commenting on the as a local entrepreneur, also in maritime. In Harlem, we would welcome and support the repurposing of the marine transfer station. And I know that there's been a whole bunch of new transfer stations in Manhattan as well, with a lot of city funding for that. But he asks a question about speaking more about the distribution of smaller local containers delivered to localized regions that may help electrical vehicles for the distribution component with last mile delivery. Does anyone have a comment about what this different structure in that Vimeo video can actually create better use of electrical vehicles? Because that has a different range and use as well.
I would see the logistics, as Jim was talking about, the cold storage and the logistics facilities for the breakdown, all happening on Pier 10 and Pier 9, A and B. I would see them being put into the trucks there, into electric vehicles or electric bicycles like UPS has tried out with the containers in the back. Instead of putting big containers on boats to travel, you could probably fit 25 electric vehicles on a small ferry that could pull into, as Michael Preston said, that former marine transfer station, and front ramp drops down, these electric vehicles drive out, they deliver their goods, the vessel comes back to BMT for another load, goes back up to Harlem. Those vehicles been unloaded, the new ones go into the neighborhood, the old ones go on the boat, go back to Brooklyn Marine Terminal. Just like Jim was saying, we keep everything off the road. We can break it down there and make the vehicle transfer there, which again, then you have small vehicle mechanics and storage and drivers and all those other jobs that go along with the distribution system. So it should be looked at more holistically, and we need time.
But can I just add to that though, Tom?
Go ahead, Jim.
We just created a standardized small container that can go on a bicycle chassis. So this way we're not doing ro-ro. Why do ro-ro when we can stack these on top of each other and have a standardized small container for these electric bicycles, vehicles, whatever they are, have them be able to pick up a 4-pack. Each one at the sorting facility is going to be destined to a particular zip code. And this way, these 5 containers or 10 containers are going to go to 11231. These are going to 11232. These are going wherever. And then you just go along, drop them, and then they'll go right onto the chassis, or they'll have a small crane there where they can put them on chassis as they're coming in and going out. I mean, I'm not saying, I'm just trying to think out of the box on different options that we all are trying to do. And that's what I'm just coming up with.
I agree, but I would see that happening at BMT because
Yeah.
vehicles should go along with the cargo and not have parking facilities in local neighborhoods to pick up containers. But you could put like 4 or 5 of those for electric bicycles for sure, and you could have a larger container for a step van. An average step van has a certain size container, so we could do both of those, both the bicycle and step van containers. But that, the details could be worked out if there was the desire to work them out.
That's it.
Well,
Time.
on that note,
Key.
on desire, and more desire is afoot here in the community, we're going to wrap up. And so if you can give me 45 seconds for your last kind of thought, maybe for folks who are still tuned in, over 126 folks, what are your final thoughts? And then I'll hand it over to Layla. We'll start with you, Jim.
I want to, I've been pushing that we keep the whole port, the BMT, maritime. Let's figure out how we're going to make it best used. And, I think we should slow down the process. I think we should take the Red Hook Marine Terminal at this point, the way it's operating, let them have their 60 acres, let them do what they need to do so that they can expand and just be there to support the city and this whole network. And then we got to work on all these other flex maritime spaces, Atlantic Basin, the cruise terminal, the Secret Service building that we have there. We have a lot of space and we need to use it wisely.
Thank you, Jim. Simon?
I would just encourage everyone to think in scale. Like, think about what's best for the site, what's best for the city, what's best for all the other nodes of infrastructure that the city is investing in, and how these play together. And then what's best for this as a more distributed system that supports a much broader initiative. And maybe housing is part of it. And for sure, it addresses some local issues. But how can this site maximize its benefit for multiple scales? And then just to tie it back to the last presentation about kind of the resilient BMT, I love what Walter said about he takes his boat from Red Hook and basically boats to the office. So like, I want to think about like a future where we all have a much more casual and friendly relationship with water, where we understand the maritime industry better, where these terms aren't so foreign, and where we can really have dialogue that's meaningful around these things. And thank you for City Club of New York for kind of elevating the maritime industry portion. I've learned a lot in the last 2, and it's been great to be a part of it.
Thanks, Simon. Tom?
I agree with everything everyone said, and I think Simon hit it right on the head in terms of, for me, highest and best use means what's best for everyone, not what's best for the money people. So I'm confused by thinking highest and best uses. To me, highest and best use is what makes sense for the community, what makes sense for the city, and what makes sense whatever industry you're trying to support. But I would say we need to broaden our network. We need to get outside of Brooklyn, which is, I hope, what these things are doing. We need to get the media involved. It's sleepy. It's a Brooklyn story. It's not a Brooklyn story. This is an incredible citywide story. It's a nationwide story of a struggle to keep maritime industry in one of the greatest cities in the world. So I think we need to amplify our message. I think we need to pound on the table every chance we get and say no, but. Not say no, but no, but. We should look at it in a more reasonable fashion, in a more integrated way, in a real transparent and participatory manner. It'll work.
Thank you, Tom. And as I hand it over to Layla to close us out, I just want to say thank you for participating in this. in this discussion, in all the panels of City Club, for your comments. We didn't get to every comment, but I saw them, and I want to just leave you with, you have power. You have power. You're smart. Community, get together. We'll be together, and we can really make a change here. I really believe that, even now. So with that, Layla?
Thank you so much, Carlos, and thank you to Tom and to Jim and to Simon. Great, great conversation. At the peak, I think we had 150 people logging in tonight. We are really, really pleased and proud to organize these webinars. This issue is incredibly important. It is not a Brooklyn issue. It is a New York City issue. It is actually a regional issue. So we're very, very pleased to be involved in this issue. We're going to continue to be incredibly focused. Yes, we will have yet another webinar on this topic. This will be the fourth. We really feel that, it is such a complex and widespread issue that it really deserves all that time, and we're very, very proud to be doing that. As Carlos said, we have power. We need to make our voices heard, and the discouragement that we may feel at times is by design. Okay, let me say that again. The discouragement that we feel at times is by design. Those who are in the lead trying to define what best use is want you to be discouraged. So don't let it happen. You can control that. That's kind of the one thing you can really control. You can control whether you decide to be discouraged or not. My advice, my word to you, don't be discouraged, no matter what, no matter what. And when people tell you that it is a done deal, tell them that it is not a done deal. It's not even legal as of now to do any of what is on the table. Okay, so let's continue to be incredibly focused. Let me also say that 2025 in New York City is an election year. All right, we're a 501c3, so I will certainly not tell you who to vote for and how to engage in with and which candidate you should go and shake hands with. What I can tell you though is that there are candidates forums almost every week, probably every week, actually almost every day. Attend a candidates forum, ask questions, meet all the candidates. The mayoral race is an incredibly competitive one. I think 10 candidates, let's say 10 viable candidates. If you look at the Campaign Finance Board record, I think there's like 42 candidates who have registered. Okay, so get engaged, get involved in this process. There are other incredibly important races as well. The comptroller race has incredible significance in this particular process. So that is also a great opportunity to bring this to the forefront. This should be a campaign issue. So this is my plea to you. You have a lot of power. One more thing I will say. There are currently 2 charter revision commissions, one spearheaded by the mayor and another one spearheaded by the city council. I know that actually being involved is incredibly taxing, I know. But please take a moment to actually engage in these processes, because some of our friends and allies who are on this call have already done that. And I think that there is an opportunity to really change the charter so that maritime use, so that waterfront, so that development, resiliency industry can actually be integrated in an agency or an authority, or, let's figure out how it will be called, maybe, an office. It doesn't matter, so long as it is not a public benefit corporation that responds to no one. So once again, we will actually provide all these resources. These hearings that are happening will be on our website. We'll make sure that, you have an opportunity to know what's going on, where to go, a lot of opportunities on Zoom, which is great. With all of that being said, I will give you my closing statement. I want to really extend a special thank you to John Shapiro and Tom Fox. Tom was a participant, but he's also the co-chair, along with John Shapiro, of the City Club's Waterfront Committee. The work that they do is just mind-blowing, and I'm just so proud to call them my colleagues. And a big thank you for the leadership. I want to extend a huge thank you to Juan Rivero, who is the chair of the City Club Program Committee, for organizing tonight's event, as well as all the other events. It is so much work, and we're so grateful to Juan for all the work that he has done. We will be doing, as I said, one more webinar, possibly even a second one. Stay tuned. We're not going away. We're going to keep paying attention to this issue. Thanks again to our panelists. Thank you to the audience. We know that there were many other things that you could have done tonight, so we're really very appreciative that you decided to spend this hour and a half with us. And I want to remind everyone that the City Club is a non-for-profit. All of us here are volunteers, and we are fiercely independent. We rely on contributions from grassroots supporters like you. If you like the work that we are doing, please consider making a tax-deductible donation. You can find the link on our website. You will get a little email tomorrow, and there will be a big fat red button saying donate. Don't be shy. We really need your support. We appreciate it. And we thank you for staying with us, and we wish you a good evening. Good night.